Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the International Institute for Peace. I'm Marylia, Hushcha, researcher here at the IIP, and I'd like just to welcome you in our premises to this very wonderful event. We're very happy that it's so well attended. We're discussing the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement today, and we actually started discussing it already yesterday at the Foreign Ministry and today during the day at the Austrian Center for International Affairs. So this event is sort of a summary of these 2 days of discussions, but also an opportunity to talk about Dayton with a broader public, to listen to you, to your views, to your questions, and maybe also expand and go beyond just Dayton and just Bosnia, just the Western Balkans, and talk a little bit about the ongoing conflicts today in other parts of the world. So we have a wonderful panel to talk about it today. And before I hand over to our panel, maybe I just like to say a couple of words about how this event came to be. We have this wonderful initiative called Western Balkans Youth Vision 2030. We've been running it for already 7 years. And the idea of this initiative is to gather young people from the region, bring them to European capitals, travel with them to different capitals in the Western Balkans to discuss and promote European integration, reconciliation, and more ties and contacts and peace in the region. And so part of our panelists today are also members of this initiative. Some of them are not, but maybe they will become. With this, I just want to say very big thanks to our cooperation partners in this project, and this is Karl-Renner-Institut and Austrian Center for International Affairs, as well as the University of Graz. And with this, I hand over to Gerhard Marchl from Renner-Institut. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Marylia. I'm Gerhard Marchl. I'm representing the Karl-Renner-Institut, where I'm responsible for European politics. Yeah, I'd like to join Marylia's words of thank you, so to say. Thank you to all of you for your interest. We are approaching Christmas, and it's great that there's still much interest, despite the season, in the Western Balkans, in Bosnia in particular, and in the lessons we can learn from the Dayton Peace Agreement. 30 years of Dayton Peace Agreement. We often tend to have a quite negative perspectives on Bosnia and Herzegovina. We often say, yeah, no reforms, no hope, no progress on the way to the EU. Yeah, we only say and only see that there is standstill, a lack of reforms, no hope, no progress, no reforms. But that was also a lesson for me today, that the Dayton Peace Agreement and the history since then and the developments in the country are not only negative. Dayton brought peace, and this is already an important achievement. And we also see progress in the country, not enough for sure, but still. And this is what we are discussing tonight with excellent speakers. Thanks to you, and thanks also from my side to the cooperation partners, especially to the IIP as host of tonight's event, and the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Vedran Djic is also here. Thanks a lot. And yeah, now it's time to hand over, and I hand over to our first speaker, Ferenc NÉMETH. He is joining us from Budapest. He is a PhD candidate at Corvinus University of Budapest, and he will present first reflections of his analysis on 30 years after Dayton. When will positive peace prevail? Ferenc, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for including me and political capital, a Budapest-based think tank that I have the pleasure to represent here in Vienna today. We have launched a Western Balkans focus project this September, in which we basically investigate peace-related issues with regards to the Western Balkans vis-à-vis Hungary and Hungarian influence in the broader Southeast European sphere. This December, just in a few days, we are going to publish our newest policy brief that will be available on Political Capital's website that deals with the post-Dayton establishment in Bosnia-Herzegovina and asks the question of whether the so-called positive peace has been achieved in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So just shortly, I would like to first introduce you to the concept of positive peace, but also give you some idea on our main takeaways from the policy brief. So for those who don't know, positive and negative peace, those concepts are very idealistic, but in short, negative peace refers to the idea or the absence of hostilities or armed conflicts, whereas positive peace refers to an environment that is characterized by the lack of injustice or lack of unjust practices. Like I mentioned, it's a very idealistic, unattainable status. Even the most developed democracies out there cannot really fall into this category, but it is a very good concept to highlight the vulnerabilities that Bosnia-Herzegovina continues to face 30 years after the Dayton Peace Accords. In a sense, I argue in the policy brief that positive peace, or let's say a step closer to stability, can actually be achieved through EU integration, or in a sense, EU as a mechanism or as a tool can bring Bosnia-Herzegovina closer to a more peaceful or a more stable environment. Because there are many issues that the country faces even 30 years after Dayton, many of them are coming from the inside, from internal actors trying to challenge the Dayton framework or establishment even nowadays. But also, and this is the second part of the policy brief, although there are many internal challenges in Bosnia-Herzegovina, there are also external ones that must be taken into consideration, especially through or amid certain global changes that we are witnessing in the past 1.5 years. There are countries, neighboring countries and countries in the neighborhood that may cause more instabilities than stability inside of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also the changes in the White House leadership, for example, might cause more problems in Bosnia-Herzegovina than good. So the main takeaway from this is that although Bosnia-Herzegovina faces many challenges, the Dayton framework is still capable of, to a certain extent, of ensuring and maintaining peace and stability in the region, or in Bosnia-Herzegovina in particular, although that might not lead us to this idealistic concept of achieving positive peace. But nevertheless, what is very important for Bosnia-Herzegovina is to realize how to deal with internal as well as external challenges amid major global shifts. And hopefully, these remarks will be very beneficial also for this discussion that is about to begin, especially in terms of how we define peace, whether peace can be achieved through EU integration, and how the example of Bosnia-Herzegovina in terms of international cooperation and in terms of internal influences can be an example to other regions such as Ukraine or Palestine in the future to come. So with that, I would like to also thank you for the opportunity and good luck for the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ferenc. Good evening also from my side. I'm Swoboda, President of IIP. I want to welcome all of you again, and of course our special guests with whom I want to have, at least this is our intention, a lively discussion, even if maybe we don't disagree too much, but we don't want to have long speeches, but short statements, and yeah, maybe with some special hints and whatever, is also the personal background. And with this, I want to start. I could, of course, present all of you in a long term, but maybe yourself say, Donika, you are more or less a founding. Well, you are already a mother, but you are also a founding mother of our young Balkans working group. What is your background? Why do you deal with peace, if you deal with peace?
Oh, yeah. Well, good evening. It's my pleasure to be here. And yes, I left my 6-month-old baby to come to my first baby. I enjoyed being part of this initiative just for the fact that it gathered all of us most of us in the Balkans back then, and also across Europe, and just discussing about peace and how do you deal with the past and how do we work together to create a common future. And we continued this initiative for so long, which basically is an integral part of my life. I mean, when I think back, what do I want? Why did I decide to do what I do? It's because of war, and I was 10 during the war in Kosovo, so I've experienced the fall of Yugoslavia, but also the resistance of my parents. I recently became a mother, and only then I realized how difficult it was for my mother to bring me in a country on the brink of a war, and for my parents to actually navigate that situation with 3 kids and 4 kids then afterwards. And I, now at this age would never be able to do that. So I only understood the strength of my parents now. So basically my life story became also my work. So that's why my work is not work, is, my life. So I've been working on this field for more than 15 years. And I guess I decided to do this the night I actually watched the news and they announced the NATO bombing in former Yugoslavia, and I still remember vividly that moment. And then every time I went to NATO, to EU, even to DC, where all these decisions have been taken, I just look back and I think of that little girl who was frightened in front of the TV and happy for that decision, although that decision was quite difficult for all of us to process afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Max? Yeah. You live in peaceful Graz. Thank you very much for the cooperation. Why do you deal with peace or war?
Good question, actually.
Michael.
Good question. I just asked myself the question. I gave a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict last week and was the toughest experience I had at the university. This course is already pretty much intense emotionally, also with students. Graz is normally quite apolitical, but it unfortunately has changed. So, and I ask myself, why am I actually doing this in the first place? So, my mother is from Greece, and I grew up with stories from Turks and how mean Turks are, and that you cannot really trust them. My great-grandparents having been evicted from the Ottoman Empire, coming to Greece, and was intense. And then we always were watching stories from Cyprus and how mean the Turks are again. And later I also grew up in Algeria partly, and I had friends, Muslim friends, and then 9/11 happened, and what was being told about the Muslims and about Islam did not really cohere with what I knew about Islam, and there was, I think, differences in discourses which kind of caught my attention, and the injustices behind this difference of discourses, which was later kind of everywhere I went, it was emphasized again. Going to Lebanon, talking to people, talking to Palestinians from Lebanon, and then witnessing how different their stories and narratives are from the stories that are present in Europe, and the injustices behind, I think, made me do what I'm doing now.
Olesya, it's maybe even cynical to ask you why you deal with war and peace, but please explain it nevertheless to us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's such a joy to learn from colleagues and to see such a full room. I don't know if I deal with peace very much. I certainly deal with war. I'm a historian of Ukraine, and I was a historian of war. My first book was on the Second World War, then I continued doing research on the Second World War. But when the actual war started in 2014, Russia's war against Ukraine, it sort of became harder and harder to think about history. And when my brother, who was serving in the Ukrainian armed forces, was killed in 2017 at the front, it became impossible to think about history only. So I started to write about Russia's war against Ukraine. And in 2022, I sort of became a full-time Ukrainian. It became very obvious that the world didn't really understand what that part of the world was about and needed people to explain it. And when you become a full-time Ukrainian, I think a lot of people here can identify with that in your own contexts. Like you said, you know, your life becomes your work or your work becomes your life. In my case, you sort of become the person who talks about the war all the time. And here I'd like to quote a friend and a fellow writer, Victoria Amelina. She was killed in Kramatorsk in 2023, and in her unfinished book that was posthumously published and finished by a group of editors, her friends, she says, we Ukrainians, we all became war. Nothing else about us matters. And that's painful truth that we live with at the moment.
Thank you very much. In a way, maybe we can briefly touch the question, do we speak too much of peace or too much of war? But maybe, because you mentioned that, because some people, peace loving and peace scientists very often say, don't speak all the time of war, we should speak about peace. But you say you have to speak about war. Maybe we have to speak about war in order to speak more about peace afterwards. But that's another issue, but maybe you can touch it briefly in the round, unless you want to say something immediately.
Well, in the workshop, and I think a lot of you were at the workshop earlier, which I found fascinating, I mentioned that sadly, and it breaks my heart, but for Ukrainians, peace has become a dirty word now, because if somebody is trying to force you to surrender and present the plan for surrender and capitulation as a plan for peace, then you're going to react, then you're going to be triggered by the word peace. I'm looking around and seeing these beautiful doves, and I am triggered by that symbol. And that is frightening, and I think it is something for us to think very hard about. There's a nation of 40-something million that gets triggered by the word peace, and we all have a role to play in that, because true peace is not about making the country that has been attacked, the victim, surrender and force it to capitulate. True peace is something else, and I'm sure we're going to come to that discussion later.
Adi, you're in some way the godfather of our young Balkans working group. You're from the beginning with it. Maybe you present your background here.
Yes, I think it also shows how long the initiative has been ongoing, since I was young when it started. But I think for me, the reason why I deal with what I deal with, or why I work on what I work, and why I care about the peace, is because I felt how destructive war can be, and how difficult but precious peace can also be. I was also 10 years old when the Dayton Peace Agreement, almost 10 years old when the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed, and what I remember from our road back from Croatian coast after we end up with our refugee status was not just crossing the border of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, but also crossing 3 or 4 checkpoints inside the country. The destruction that the war left, the fact that we were not able or not even thinking of driving through what was then Serb territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina because it was considered dangerous. The fact that back in my hometown, out of 12 flats that were in our building, 6 were, for my mother, 6 of the flats were occupied by people who were refugees from eastern Bosnia, and the Serbs and Bosniaks left those flats who lived there before the war. War criminals were all over the TV, from Plavšić, Krajišnik to Prlić, and this was the reality of the post-war. Completely 3 almost mono-ethnic territories living side by side, fearing of each other. and then knowing throughout these young years of mine how much efforts it took to destroy, to tear some of these walls between the communities, to build the state, to have joint police, joint border control, joint army, to have some sense of inter-ethnic communication, inter-ethnic exchange, and to have today Bosnia and Herzegovina, in which, you know, it's not mono-ethnic territories, but there are mixed areas. And the fact that still there are people who would, for some of the ideas, destroy this and go back to fighting for some of the ideas from 1980s and 1990s is what keeps me in this, explaining why it's why it's destructive, the war, and why it's precious what we have achieved, and why we need to keep it.
Let's stay at the Balkans and at Dayton. Dayton is the starting point of this discussion. Before Dayton there was war, but before war there was more or less peace. There was no war. And so my first question to all of you, of course, is, was the war you were dealing with, or is in your background, could it have been prevented? Was it necessary to have a war and then a peace agreement and then an after war? Of course, you can answer in yes or no, but you can perhaps some sentences add why you think it was avoidable or not avoidable.
6 sentences. On 7th of March 2025, this year, Milorad Dodik in Banja Luka issued an order for the regional police in Republika Srpska to go into police buildings of the state-level police and to use force to kick them out of those buildings and to kick them out of the Republika Srpska territory. This was the order. That did not happen. Almost it happened. And the reason why it did not happen was because, first of all, the institutions who were in charge for it intervened, local institutions. Second was Milorad Dodik did not have a backing of the opposition in Republika Srpska. A lot of people inside his inner circle were not supportive of what he wanted, and a lot of businesses have interest in continuing living in Bosnia and Herzegovina, no matter how imperfect it is, to be where it is. And the return to violence, no matter how small or how big it would have become, was impossible also because there was some sense of democracy, some sense of media. People were talking about the danger of what that could be, the danger of escalation. And I think the wars of 1990s in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Yugoslavia would have been avoidable if Yugoslavia was a democratic country, if there was at least a little bit of democracy and a little bit of open space, if people did not follow without questioning, without thinking the ideas of let's just abandon institutions, create paramilitaries, and let's just go and cleanse territories so we can create mono-ethnic territories that we will then patch to other countries. Simply those who were against such were such a small minority and did not have resources, did not have access to media, did not have access to institutions, and those with bad ideas simply overwhelmed or flooded everyone else. So I think it was avoidable, but we would have had to be somewhat democratic and somewhat freer than we were in 1991.
Donika, Kosovo War, could have been avoided?
We think a lot about what ifs, and there is one what if, which is what if Yugoslavia would have been part of the, well, not European Union back then, it was a community, this could have been avoided because everybody would, was talking about integrating a larger territory, which, back then was quite, developed, and it could have been prevented in that way by democratizing, embracing it in the family. Second is, my story and my understanding of Yugoslavia and my experience is way different from people from other countries of Yugoslavia. And not a lot has been talked about what was Yugoslavia for Albanians. And how did we get through Yugoslavia? And that is every person who is Yugo-nostalgic doesn't make sense to me. I understand it is their story, but my story is nothing related to nostalgia. It's trauma. So this is the other point. And then the international community point of view, it could have been avoided, full stop. I mean, in the 90s, there were, very good circumstances around the international community, and by that I'm referring to what was, in the EU now and the US, to sort of pay more attention to what was happening in Yugoslavia when, like the Berlin Wall was falling, because, at that point that it didn't matter, because they were winning against, the Soviets, and this little part of Europe was not relevant for them to maintain that balance, which was during the Tito's time. So maybe Bosnia couldn't have been avoided, but Kosovo, come on, it could have been. After everything that happened, the UN being literally ashamed in Srebrenica, and seeing that what started was unstoppable. The fact that it didn't stop there, it's what hurts, because there were resources and it could have been avoided. And then, again, I consider myself lucky because of the NATO intervention, because when I traveled in Ukraine in 2023, I was just walking around in Kiev and I was thinking they don't have our luck, because our luck was a community of, the international community and mainly US, which was pushing things in a very unconventional way, as always US does, even without the UN Security Council approval, to launch the NATO intervention in former Yugoslavia. And we were lucky enough to have that support, because we wouldn't be here if those things didn't happen. So that's why I felt sorry when I was in a bunker, in a basement of a public school with a Ukrainian family, and I saw kids trying to tell me that, there are, drone attacks and we will be spending the night there. And I just thought of myself when I was 10 years old and I was going through all of that. So it could have been avoided the way Gaza could have been avoided today. And we see it happening in front of our eyes, and we just decide to look the other way because we have bigger problems. Or sometimes we just get tired of, reading about Ukraine because we have our issues going on. So this solidarity that we had back in the 90s, but also an international community that was driven by peace, is no longer there. And I think this is a point you hit rock bottom, because from now on you don't know where to go.
Thank you. Well, the Israel-Palestine conflict is, of course, a long one, much contracted and very, very complex. But let's concentrate perhaps on Gaza. Could have been avoided? At what time? Who have done what?
This is the question. So let me begin a little bit more general. So I would say conflict is an ordinary part of human everyday life. War is an aberration of human interaction. So if you would ask me if war can be avoided, yes, 100% in every kind of situation. Was the First World War avoidable? Yes, indeed. Even the Second World War, in every step of the way. Gaza, yes, of course, but maybe not after October 7, but could October 7 have been avoided? Yes, definitely. Before closing and locking up the Gaza Strip in 2007, or before Sharon. So I would say from 2000 onwards, in every step of the way, Gaza war could have been avoided. The problem is, or the crucial issue, I would think, is what do we speak of when we try to respond to a conflict? Do we speak of war, or do we speak of peace? So I would say, indeed, it is a very much and crucial difference, because it relates to what we actually want. Like right now in Austria, we have kind of having this hysterical debate whether we should arm ourselves in order to fight back the Russians standing at the borders, trying to invade us at any moment, or whether we are safe. But this is not the right question. So the world is always what we make of it, and if we make it a place of war, then we will have war. And I mean, I think of my son and the world that I want him to grow up, and I don't want him to grow up in a world of war. But that doesn't mean that we sit back and hope that everyone is a pacifist, which is obviously not true, and kind of a big problem in Austria, especially with the Green Party in Germany and in Austria, rejecting any kind of peace politics. But peace politics is a lot of things to do. It means active engagement, diplomatically, yes, also militarily. I'm not afraid to say that, but most of all politically. And if we only speak about war, and in Austria we have these 1 or 2 experts talking about the need for armament. Yes, in Austria we kind of have a problem with our air force. You guys know that. It's kind of difficult for them to fly at night, which is kind of a problem. So whether we have an army or we don't have an army, but when we have one, it should work. Okay, but we should still speak about peace, because when we speak about peace, we kind of lay the path. And I would still say that already now, especially before a war breaks out, it is possible and it's necessary to avoid it, because there's no alternative to peace. What is the alternative to peace? Never-ending war. So I've never seen any army bomb another one away and then there was peace. Maybe with Germany in the Second World War, maybe this was the case, but this is the only case that this really worked out. Like, by the way, also with the liberal peace paradigm, establishing a liberal state and then hoping for peace. Yes, this worked in World War II Germany, but afterwards not really. And I mean, Dayton is a pure manifestation of this paradigm, but we'll speak later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very briefly respond to your comment. Don't get me wrong. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. Believe me. You just described what childhood is like in Ukraine. Not to mention, but this is on Ukrainian-controlled territories. Not to mention occupied territories. The problem is whether what is being offered is actual peace or war fought by other means, such as occupation.
This is only one plan, not
and
peace
then
in
it's
general.
hell on earth. Yeah. Yes. But to answer your question, was it avoidable? Short answer, yes. Longer answer, and believe me, it's not going to be long, I promise. I have to take us back over 100 years in history after the First World War. This was one of the probably first missed opportunities when the Ukrainian lands became for the first time perhaps a buffer zone. In our imagination, in the imagination of the international community, if we can call it so then, because the so-called great powers banked on stronger Poland to be, and then the buffer zone between Poland and the Bolshevik state that was being forged. Then it was exactly the same in the Second World War. Ukraine maintained its horrendous status as a buffer zone. Timothy Snyder called it bloodlands. And then if we jump to 1990s, so Ukraine is being pressured into surrendering its nuclear arms without appropriate security guarantees. And that is when a proper security gap is being cemented in the middle of Europe. And that's basically, asking for future war to happen sooner or later. And of course, it breaks out in 2014. Another missed opportunity. We sort of pretend to react, but we don't really react. And instead, we offer Russia impunity. And impunity promises escalation. And the final missed opportunity, and I really hope is going to be the final, was 2022, when again, we did not react appropriately to Ukrainian resistance. We were assuming that Ukraine was going to fall in 3 days to a week. In fact, 4 years later, we're still fighting. If Ukraine received appropriate assistance then, the sort of assistance it was asking for, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here discussing, was it avoidable? Maybe we'd be focusing on peace.
Don't want to go into details now because it's a separate discussion, but I think it is good what we heard to think about. But then we had the war in Bosnia, and then we had the agreement of Dayton. What does it mean? How do we evaluate Dayton? Maybe we ask first the people who are not directly involved and then come to you, Adi, and start with Donika again. From the inside outside or the outer inside, how do you evaluate Dayton? Is it something which is has some relevance also for Kosovo, or how do you see it?
Well, I mean, it really shows that international community does not draw proper lessons from one case to another. Or sometimes, you know, they come with one case, it worked here, and maybe it will work here as well. I mean, I was yesterday in Prague and we were talking about reconciliation, and I was surprised how they are still in the 90s. They are like, oh, this is how it worked between Czechia and Germany, and then, you know, Germany and Poland, which it didn't work. I mean, it worked in some aspects, but there are still grievances. So you can see that reconciliation process did not work because it needs more time. And I was talking to my colleagues in Ukraine when I mentioned potential negotiations with Russia. Back then in 2023, they were like, of course, you know, this is out of question, or reconciliation as well. You could see that back then this was not even, you know, part of the public narrative, but now it's becoming gradually. When I don't think of Dayton because I think of Kosovo and I think of the Ahtisaari plan, because, you know, like Ahtisaari plan is something that now, I mean, it became the constitution of Kosovo and now is seriously being challenged from within. We always have this discussion with Adi, which is worse, Kosovo or Bosnia, in terms of, you know, laggards. We don't say worse, we say who is the laggard. So it's kind of, you know, every year when country reports are published, we have this discussion. And Adi always tells me, like, Donika, at least you can function internally. When it comes to, you know, making decisions internally that are in your national interest, you do it, you manage to do it. We are not managing to do it anymore. So that is the problem. Ahtisaari plan was amazing, but these plans should be time-bound. These plans cannot last forever. And these plans are, especially, I'm talking about Kosovo specifically now, they are perfectly written, but they function only if all sides are very much willing to implement everything impeccably. Because if one side wants to block something and they have the mechanisms to do so, then it's over. Then you just are entangled in this process in which going back from what you have is worse, but also you don't know how to move on. You don't know how to change it. And even if you know how to change it, like the constitution in Bosnia, for instance, there are always discussions, you cannot do it because of the blockages and because of the way that, you know, Dayton sort of created that environment, and in Kosovo, the Ahtisaari plan created that environment. So now, almost 2 decades after the Declaration of Independence, we are challenging the Constitution, not being able to change it, not knowing what to do with it, and without a plan and without an international community that was actually active when this Balkans all happened. So back then in the 90s, we had some sort of, you know, elite dealing with the Balkans. We don't have that anymore. We don't have that as active in member states, not in Brussels, certainly not in DC, and there are other hotspots in the world. There is Ukraine, there is, you know, Gaza, and all kinds of regions which make Balkans fall into, you know, sort of probably backseat when it comes to all these big agendas and discussions. And now we are left with a mess that we cannot fix. So in terms of, yes, did it bring something? Ahtisaari brought the independence of Kosovo, which is something that today would have never happened. Is it perfect? It is not. Does it function? Most of the time, not. And it needs a lot of compromise. And compromise, just like peace in Kosovo, is becoming a dirty word. Every time you compromise, you're losing something. And all this, you know, environment sort of gradually makes the country dysfunctional, and that is why we're facing a lot of issues, not only towards the Serbian community in Kosovo, but now even among the Albanian parties in understanding what the constitution is and how do we implement it and how do we continue our efforts to continue state building in an environment which is completely different from when we started this process.
Max, Graz is nearer to Sarajevo than Vienna, but to Sarajevo is, but still outside. But nevertheless, you deal with this issue. Maybe also can include already what Donika mentioned. Can such agreement work without a strong intervention or strong engagement of the international community?
That's kind of the question, I think. I think it depends how it's done. It might be necessary to do that, but the how is the crucial question. I would like to raise 2 points, 2 short points. The first one is that what I think the international community and also academics learned from the Dayton case is that once you create peace or once you make peace, meaning that armed hostilities stop, and then you think about the next steps, to already think about the future, what shall happen. Not like in the case of Dayton, preventing the worst, but also preventing from a little bit better through this constitution. I think this is what was learned. And the second thing, the Dayton Agreement was in the middle of the 90s, and these were also the heydays of the liberal peace. So the only alternative to liberal peace with the socialist peace was more or less deemed unworking. And I mean, I can still remember these optimism in the 90s, and you all know the end of history and this mood. So there was really this can-do mentality, and this mentality that this has to work, and if it doesn't work, then the people who applied it are barbarians, and we just have to educate them a little more so they can do, because the concept is perfect. So there was this can-do mentality, and also the terminology state building, peace building. So you can actually build a state, you can actually build peace. And this is what the international community, the UN, reflected a lot of times. And you can criticize the UN, but you cannot say that it's not an organism that does not want to learn. So there are many, many evaluation mechanisms. And the UN has learned a great deal, I would say. No one's speaking about peace building anymore. You speak about sustaining peace since 2016. You say maybe peace cannot actually be built, but it's better maybe to look what's happening and then support that. So I would also say that relating to this, and then what we discussed also before and right now, the question is not about negative or positive peace. The question is about the local peace. So what do people really think? Who are the actors on the ground? So this is the crucial thing, and I think if the international community empowers these actors, then it should work out. But yes, we kind of need an international community to actually come in and support these processes.
Olesya, what does Dayton say to you? Does it mean anything for you, or do you think already about what was different in the negotiation of Dayton and what is different to the situation you are confronted, or Ukraine is confronted with today, without going into details, but the whole process?
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure if we're, as humans in general, very good at learning from past lessons. But this exercise is definitely very helpful, because for me as a Ukrainian, to look at Dayton is an opportunity to think about the day after tomorrow. Not just about today, not just about tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. And that's the bit that is difficult to think about. But here we've got an example of things that went well and didn't go so well, which we can consider and apply to our context. And a couple of things that I'd like to focus on. I mean, I'm not gonna say anything groundbreaking here. There is no lasting peace without justice, right? And then this is maybe the key lesson that we should all be focusing on. Accountability cannot be a bargaining chip. Accountability cannot be dispensable, and also it should not be perceived as something that should be delayed after ceasefire. We'll come to think about it. There'll be some kind of tribunal later on at some point. There is urgency for accountability. I am researching now, I started writing a new book, and it's on Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of children. The figures that you see in the media, sort of 20,000 children, these are identified cases. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of abducted children, and we're talking talking about more than 1.5 million of Ukrainian kids living in occupation, therefore at risk of being illegally transformed. There's urgency of accountability there. Some of them are infants. They will have no memory of having been abducted. Their identities are being erased. We owe it to them to provide justice. And the other sort of lesson, I suppose, or parallel maybe that I'm seeing is the lack of expertise. And I think Ukrainians share this with Western Balkans, you know, the perception of the outside world, the conflict, the war, but also the region is just too complicated to get our head around it. Well, all regions are complicated. It's a matter of developing expertise and developing it in time and not pretending that, you know, not assuming that superiority of economic or political position implies superiority of knowledge. So going back to people on the ground who have that expertise, because when we do have that expertise, we begin to address the causes of wars, and they cannot be disregarded, because the causes of wars should allow us to then come with appropriate solutions of lasting and just peace. Not sure if I'm thinking a lot, because I learned a lot this morning and yesterday through discussions. I have to say I found them rather depressing but realistic, and maybe such depressing realistic discussions are what we need at the moment.
Adi, you heard the so-called outside views. How do you see
the judgment? Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to the start of the war, I think where the internet, because I spoke about the locals, how they could have prevented the war. I think what the internationals made a mistake was not recognizing early on what they are dealing with and what are the ideas behind the energy that drove Bosnia and Yugoslavia into the war. And this energy was, in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, 2 projects. One was to carve out mono-ethnic territory where Serbs would be in majority and which would then be attached to Serbia or what's left of Yugoslavia. The other project is to carve out a territory where Croats would be in majority that would be then patched to Croatia. And even last night we've heard at the discussion about Kutilev plan, the first European plan, and the fact that Izetbegovic was the one rejecting the plan, and that if he had accepted it, maybe there would be no war. And Haris Imamovic, one historian, is writing, I think he's writing at the moment, an article on that, where he actually, based on historical evidences, points that, in fact, Kutilev and others who were engaged, they did not understand what the Serb side and the Croat side actually wanted. They did not want to reorganize Bosnia and then allow it to be independent. They wanted to divide the territory and to attach different territories. And this is why Izetbegovic has dealt as he did. I think the legacy of the Dayton, now I come to answer to your question, is that in parts, elements of the Dayton Accords have allowed for these 2 projects to be, in a way, defeated. Why do I mean that? It's not just that these 3 mono-ethnic territories or 2 mono-ethnic territories were patched together in one state, that we've created quite a lot of institutions that are joint, from border police to different police judicial levels, tax unit, to joint military. It's also that through the International Criminal Tribunal and through persecution of the key actors behind these projects, 161 of them were brought to justice, were indicted, and some of them are still in prison because of that. And that took 2 decades, $2 billion, and it was quite an endeavor. The second thing, obviously, is the legacy of the Dayton is that it provided legal basis for people to return to their pre-war places, and 98% of the property was returned. A lot of people returned. Some of them stayed. Yes, some of them left. But the accords, as such, created a basis for this multi-ethnic character, at least to some level, be restored, and it provided a basis to somewhat democratic and somewhat liberal country of Bosnia and Herzegovina that now allows, even if the ideas from 1980s and 1990s still live on, and some people who are even in important positions still
push them and do even concrete things to achieve them, we have much bigger push against those ideas than we had in 1980s. What Dayton didn't achieve, last sentence, is to make Bosnia and Herzegovina in a truly liberal democracy, market economy, where citizens feel that their country and society is successful, where they feel that they can live better in next year than they lived in the last year, and where people not just want to live, but want to return to live and build their lives. That Dayton hasn't succeeded, but I don't think that was the idea behind the Dayton initially. It was to create the basis for then Bosnian and Herzegovinians, if they manage to then create such society.
Thank you. Olesya totally distracted and destroyed my structure for the debate when she spoke suddenly. You will not be the first to answer. Suddenly about just.
I apologize, but maybe
No, you should not. For just peace, and I would say you need a just peace for having peace, and I would say in several cases you have to choose between justice and peace. So we discussed this issue, so I want to ask you on this issue, and maybe Donika, has the Ahtisaari plan and all what developed done justice to the Albanian, and has the constitution and the policies in Albania or in Kosovo done justice to the Serb minority in the country? How is justice developing in your country?
Well, before I go there, I must disagree with you. UN never learns lessons, and unfortunately, I mean, we have an UNMIK. I mean, there is a UN mission in Kosovo. I don't know what they're doing, and I consider myself quite well informed on what happens in Kosovo. So Kosovo was this lab, and I hope Ukraine will not become that, of hosting all kinds of experimental CSDPs and missions and all kinds of rather sometimes even mediocre people who just came and told us it worked in, I don't know, South Africa, I should work here. And then they spent 6 months in the country. And during that time, they hardly understood the basics about the country, and they moved to another region. So Kosovo has hosted UNMIK, ULEX, and still hosting ULEX, ICO, which was, during the supervised independence. And of course, there is always OSCE with the different mission in Kosovo and all kinds of other missions, hardly coordinated and completely making a mess, having executive powers and, completely then messing the decision-making process, taking the responsibility of the shoulders of the local elites, which then sometimes exploited that. So it became like this huge cycle of blaming each other, in which us as citizens are still very much confused as to what is going on. And in addition to this, we also have the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, in which you feel like you don't have agency. That is a sad story. If they intervene and they help you win the war, you might never get agency. Even after years, the lack of expertise is not, it's the least of the problem. The fact that they don't respect local ownership is the actual problem, because there are many brilliant people in the country who would know how to fix things and would probably give it a try, but instead, we have to sort of coordinate every decision with the internationals, whatever the internationals are, to be honest, because, what the internationals were in the 90s are not the internationals of today. That's also, after you spend 3 decades dealing with the same issue, a lot of factors change and a lot of circumstances change. So yes, in terms of justice, no justice.
Donika, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You raised a question. We have to deal with the question now and wait for the justice. Adi, what do you say about the international community in Bosnia? Is it working? Or should it be leave the country and give the ownership to the citizen?
I think international community should learn our lessons, and that is that, yes, it has a lot of instruments in Bosnia and Herzegovina through Dayton Peace Agreement. For those who don't know, we still have a high representative with, on the paper, very wide-ranging powers of being able to enact laws, sack politicians, change regional constitutions. But we also have a military mission, EU mission, and we do still have the arbitration on Brčko district, which, while temporarily closed, there is still a person sitting in State Department which can come anytime and decide differently. And he was in March when we had this very difficult situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina to tell the sides in Banja Luka that if they continue behaving as they do, there might be a change of the arbitration. So international community has a lot of instruments in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I don't think that they are learning lessons what these instruments are helpful or unhelpful at the moment. So there's a lot of people who say, oh, if we didn't have bond powers, high representative, EU4, country would collapse and there would be a secession and there would be return to conflict. But in every instance in the past 5 to 10 years where we did have any close to situation, even remotely close, or in March 2025, there was not a single role for EU, for OHR, or any other international instruments. So I think internationals should learn that these instruments do not serve the purpose which they think that they are serving, and should approach Bosnia and Herzegovina in a different way. It was much more helpful that the EU said behind the closed doors that, you know, trading with EU, if you do what you plan to do in October 2021, will not be same. Traveling to EU, if you do your own border police, if you get out of the state-level institutions, will not be as easy as it was before. That was much more helpful and beneficial on the political decision-making in Banja Luka than any possibility of the OHR imposing something or EU for being sent in front of the institution. In fact, on 7th of March, unlike days before and days after, EU4 didn't show up in front of these buildings because they knew that there would be order for the police of Republika Srpska to come into these institutions. And they said, we don't want to have anything with this because we are too afraid. So it shows you to which level there is misconception in how we discuss about what the role of these international instruments that stem from Dayton Peace Agreement and what the actual role in everyday life is, and how actually international community can be helpful in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
I'm happy about the answer because it was already, no, I was still in the European Parliament. I said we should leave out the High Representative, but Max wants to defend the international community.
Sorry, no, not at all. I somehow ended up saying the opposite of what I believe is true. So let me first say, when I said that the UN is a learning organism, that relates to the strategy documents. And I was referring to the Sustaining Peace document from 2016, which actually said we cannot really build peace or do state building, but we can actually only do a little. And the crucial dynamics that are the foundation of peace are those that are happening on the ground from people that we actually don't really have access to, so we cannot really comprehend what's happening. We should try to grasp it and simply support it. So this is the highest level of strategy, which the UN is not doing, unfortunately. Yes, and I'm fully aware, and this is the other thing. So there's some kind of a violence in this due to the very fact that it is internationals, it is externals coming to another location. So this is a simple epistemic problem. So people growing up in a certain context and then going somewhere else. So they are really having a hard time in grasping what's happening. And I can fully affirm what you said. These are completely mediocre people who often do not really know where they are. Like not really comparable to football players. You know, when Cristiano Ronaldo was transferred to Saudi, he first thought that he was in Asia somewhere, or in Far East Asia. Really interesting. But yeah, so it's a different context. They cannot really comprehend what's happening, and most people are trained at universities. You have this universalist, modernist understanding where you are kind of you are being self-assured that rationality is universal, human beings can comprehend what's happening. So you come into a situation, it's also an epistemic intervention. They think that they know what's happening, so there's kind of a a lack of modesty to just listen and observe what's happening, and also if they don't understand, say, okay, we don't really understand, so maybe we should leave again. This is and the second thing is a lot of power is involved also. This is from a point of hegemony, Eurocentrism, universalism, where I kind of already indicated this is. I mean, universalism, liberalism is the revelation. So it is the truth. If it is not working, it's not the fault of the theory, it's the fault of the people. And you can see this condescending neo-colonial elements in this kind of undertaking, which the UN will not be able to get rid of. It could diminish it, reduce it a little bit, by being more modest in doing so. But nevertheless, I believe there are many resources in place that only need to be used in a useful way.
Okay, let's go to the justice.
Before I go to the justice,
I know that you want to speak, but very briefly, because otherwise I will hand them.
No, I mean, one issue in relation to the Ahtisaari plan, for instance, which is very relevant for the security situation in the region. There is 1244, which is given the basis for the KFOR mission to be in Kosovo. So KFOR mission is a NATO mission in Kosovo, guaranteeing the security borders and also internal security. And so we have that. And then we have in the Ahtisaari plan that Kosovo does not have the right to have an army. It was Kosovo security force, not an armed force. And to change that, you need 2/3 of double majority in the parliament, which is also the minority, which is also to get the consent of the Serbs, which you would never get. So then the international community.
At least you get drones now.
Well, I mean, that is because we became creative to circumvent that, which is then problematic because then, it can be considered anti-constitutional, and that's another debate. So basically what you do is that in the, the international community constantly complains that, we have to shoulder Kosovo's security, but on the other hand, Kosovo cannot have an army and cannot be armed. There was now we started the transformation process by circumventing the constitutional changes, but it's going so slow and it's very problematic because you are entangled in the situation when you actually would want probably to have your own army, which can be equipped enough, trained enough well to become a NATO member, rather than hosting a NATO mission, which is very costly for the NATO countries, especially now with the war in Ukraine, but you cannot change that. So you are entangled in processes that, not even, locals and people who actually wrote the Constitution understand. So in terms of justice, I mean, Ahtisaari was a compromise, and that's why the compromise becomes a bad word. That's why even when you win, you feel like you're losing, because Ahtisaari gave the basis for the declaration of the independence, which is great, and that is the highest achievement that Kosovo could have. But on the other hand, there were a lot of safeguards, and the safeguards were those that, basically created a constitution which would be extremely problematic to navigate and to implement. In a way, coming from outside and being imported, not being organically written or even generated by the people of Kosovo, Serbs and Albanians, this constitution felt like is a document which we are not owner of. We can violate if we feel like it's not convenient for us. We can use it, in our benefit if, that is the case. Rarely, but it created more problems because in every situation that we have in Kosovo now, we constantly go back to the constitution, and we have a joke that every person has a mini constitution. I mean, they are in mini versions and in their little pocket, and every time there is something happening, we check the constitution, and then we understand that we don't understand the constitution, and the people who wrote the constitution understand that they cannot, and then we create the cases for the Constitutional Court, which is probably one of the most active constitutional court in the region, coming up with decisions and precedents, and then the Constitutional Court gets politicized and attacked by the political elite, and all this is too much noise. So And also when it comes to justice, it is not enough. Like when we talk about justice after the war, we talk about, this, again, the concepts that are, important, and are like reconciliation has 4 pillars. In these 4 pillars, you got to do this and this and that. And if you do this and that, you are considered reconciled. You're not. Because it's a societal, deeper, and it is a never-ending process. You constantly have to work. It is about people-to-people communication, and we were unfortunate to have very bad political elite across the regions who actually continue with a nationalist rhetoric by alienating the others and have jeopardized even the smallest will that was among the people to actually work together and reconcile.
So, Olesya, you had to listen. Of course, the conflict in Kosovo is quite different to that between Ukraine and Russia. What could be a just peace for Ukraine? And is it possible to achieve a just peace after all what Russia did to the Ukrainian? You spoke about the children. So it's a bit strange for me, but please explain, how could just peace or justice and peace at the same time be acquired for Ukraine?
It's a huge question. If we want lasting peace, and by we I don't just mean Ukrainians, primarily Europeans, but broader, those of us who call ourselves belonging to democratic community and try to preserve the current democratic order, protect it from collapsing entirely. If we want peace to be lasting, we have to focus on justice. Not only because we know that impunity is an excellent fertile ground for further violence, but also because if there is no justice, then there is appetite for revenge. And that encourages a new cycle of violence. So in order to prevent future violence, we have to focus on peace. Now the problem is that for peace negotiations to achieve something, all parties involved have to be negotiating in good faith. And we're far from that. Russia is not negotiating in good faith. It's participating in political theater. Again, that doesn't mean that it's impossible to make it participate in good faith. It's within our powers here in the peaceful parts of Europe to pressurize Russia to participate in peace negotiations for real. And then there's an opportunity to look at just peace. As things are at the moment, we've got one major party, the aggressor, that is not interested in any peace, just or otherwise. So I think we're far away from achieving something for now, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive towards it. We absolutely should, because the first 8 years of Russia's war against Ukraine, if they taught us anything, they should have taught us that impunity leads to escalation.
Well, there are different interpretations or citations or quotation of what Izetbegovic said in Dayton and after Dayton, when he said, well, this is not a just peace. It's not justified to have that peace, but we cannot go on leading the war. So do you say that Ukraine is far away from that position, that Zelensky can say that? Because in some way already there's some quotation where Zelensky is going in that direction to say, well, it's not just, and it is not justified, that kind of agreement, but probably it's better to agree now because to continue the war will be bring a worse result.
There's a difference between ceasefire and understanding that we need ceasefire to have true negotiations, or some kind of give those negotiations a possibility. And there's a difference between recognizing the gains of the aggressor as final and essentially rewarding the aggressor for the commitment of crimes. Ukrainians will never accept that sort of position. They will never accept, They can see that in order to achieve ceasefire, we need to freeze the contact line, as it is at the moment. Russia's demanding much more than that. They are not even prepared to freeze the contact line. They want the territories that they haven't even been able to conquer in 4 years of full-scale war. But there is a recognition that we have to, we have to negotiate, make certain sacrifices for ceasefire, but ceasefire is not peace. That's temporary, and we should all accept it, and then strive towards that peace which is going to be lasting. Again, believe me, I mean, we're in this situation in Ukraine at the moment that nobody's talking about some kind of permanent peace, and nobody's talking about reconciliation. We're not going to talk about it in my generation. I think we're going to leave that for a couple of generations probably. But we are, we do understand that ceasefire is essential in order to begin to work towards lasting peace.
We discussed very much about, started with that Dayton and what does Dayton mean perhaps for Ukraine and so on, but maybe the other way around, and we discussed it with Adi, if there is some sort of even ceasefire or preliminary peace or negative peace, as it was said before, in Ukraine, what does it mean for the Balkans? There will be a movement of challenging again what has been agreed in Dayton, including, of course, the question of Republika Srpska. May it even give some Serb extremist support to say, we have to go back, or the northern, or have a land swap, as it was discussed some time ago. Adi, how do you see it? Has Dayton created enough stability that whatever will be agreed or not agreed in Ukraine will not have any effect on the Western Balkans?
Hannes, you mentioned the quote from Izetbegovic from the Dayton, it's not the just peace, but my people need peace at this moment. It was in November 1995. At that point, both the Serb and the Croat side gave up on thinking it's realistic to detach parts of the country and attach them to neighboring countries. If you look at the historical recollections of people around Mladic, but also people around Tudjman, it was actually until summer 1995 that they really believed and entered every negotiations with the expectations that the outcome will be some kind of a truce that will lead to then eventually taking the parts of the country away. It was only because of the military activities by the NATO, support for the Croatian military, their advances, that this mindset changed. And I think both also in case of the 1992 early negotiations, the problem was always that the internationals came with idea, let's put the maps on the table. I mean, Coutillier came and said, let's put the maps and decide. Back then, one of his 4 proposals was, let's take municipalities and say this is a Muslim municipality, this is a Croat municipality, this is a Serb municipality. I think around 120 municipalities at that time. So international negotiations immediately entered into negotiations with the idea, let's divide the country accordingly. But because of the multi-ethnic character of the country, obviously that was difficult, and without, movement of people, without a lot of fear, a lot of tears, this would have not been possible. So when you ask me this question, I go back to this, and I go back to 2018 and the ideas of the land swap between Kosovo and Serbia as a way to settle the relationship between Serbia and Kosovo, and go back to the All Serb Assembly in 2023, summer 2023, where on paper President Vučić, government of Serbia, Parliament of Serbia adopted a document which de facto says Republika Srpska, if they want, they can decide, they have a right to decide to abandon Bosnian state institutions, abandon everything that was achieved since 1996, and we as Serbia have a right to support it. Same goes goes for the stories we can hear about the North Kosovo, about Banjska incident, why some of the structures in Serbia have been supporting that kind of things. So this idea, sorry for a longer answer, this idea of still being able to divide Bosnia, still being able to divide Kosovo along ethnic lines and somehow redraw the maps is still very live and kicking in many corners of the Western Balkans, and this is not exclusive for the Serb side. I would say that after 30 years, there are some academics and some intellectuals on all sides who think that, still that might be the easiest. I think if Ukraine really ends with some kind of a partition of Ukraine, some kind of a de facto recognition of what Russia has done, and if the European Union does not manage to fill the vacuum that exists not just in the Western Balkans but in Moldova and in post first day of Ukraine, I cannot exclude that those forces would be saying, look, we're back to 19th century, we're back to, if you're strong, if you're able to conquer, if you're able to change facts on the grounds, you can really achieve someone de facto recognizing the changes of the borders. And I think both Europe, both we who follow it, we need to take that as a realistic scenario, and we need to think about what that means for the region.
So I would propose that briefly, if you want to speak on Kosovo, and then Max, and then we have one round of discussion, well, not discussion, questions, I would say, or if you want to challenge one of the speakers here, but no comments, and you can of course speak afterwards. The longer you need, the less food will be there, because I see already some people who are standing outside to take the food, so it's up to you to decide between food and questions. But Donika, briefly.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Berlin last year, last year we were discussing about scenarios, and there is always a fear that, if you see like a meeting in the White House with a map, and the map is there, and you see all the leaders without Ukraine there, just to decide, how the future of these people is going to look like, it was terrifying. And of course, this brings us to 2018 when we talked about potentially land swap. It wasn't a land swap, I mean, because we were not talking about, the idea was just, I don't know, out there, maybe let's just do like partition Kosovo once again, and then just like look what we can do with the North, because they don't accept Kosovo's authority, and then if they go to Serbia. And that was like the biggest mistake ever, because that was almost, a decade after telling them you should integrate in the Kosovo system through the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. And then, like the land swap idea came, out of nowhere, and you were there in Alba with the problematic guys, not so problematic guys. And then, like we were all fearing what's going to happen, because everything we had built for so long, telling us Ahtisaari is good, integrate the Serbs in the Kosovo system, there is minority rights, there is this and that. And then everything fell apart. So this was, kind of questioning what have we been doing so far? And where do we go from here? And now everything is kind of on hold, and we are sort of hoping that we are not part of any agendas or a package deal with Ukraine, and whatever happens in Ukraine will not affect Western Balkans directly. So this is one of the things that the EU back in 2018 with Merkel was, and Macron to a certain degree, they could resist the idea. Now I'm not so sure about it. Looking how the EU acts around Ukraine and the United States, and Russia, I'm not sure they will have the same stamina or the same political resistance to a same idea sort of looming on the horizon again for us. And one more issue on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, because I didn't talk much about Kosovo, is that when I read Josip Glaudic's book on Yugoslavia, you can see that in the beginning, the international community saw Milosevic as their partner for dialogue. And they are making the same mistake of betting on Vučić being their partner for dialogue in the region now, with all instability pockets installed and used by not only Vučić, but also backed by Russia. he proved that he's not a partner of the West. And I am happy that only after protests in Serbia, the EU cannot continue appeasing him anymore as they used in the past. And I'm hoping that we will not get back to the days where Vučić was the guy to talk to, the partner for dialogue in the Western Balkans, because that wasted a whole decade of our life in the region.
It's a separate subject again, but now Max, and then we come to you.
I had this idea even before, but I was no time to mention it. So only briefly regarding the positive outlook after Dayton, I wanted to raise the case of Lebanon, which has kind of a comparable constitutional setup with a comparable modest political performance. Okay, Bosnia has no Hezbollah, which is good for Bosnia, but in Lebanon the situation got that worse that I mean, civil society was demanding non-sectarian political parties that it then formed, and they are getting more and more into the parliament. So the first election they wanted 2 or 3 parliamentarians from these parties, but now they are up to 15 or 20 or something like that. So some things are changing slowly due to civil society doing more and more. I don't know who was that in the morning who said that in school and also at universities you have kind of this national sense of belonging discourse, but you go home to your family and you have this other sectarian understanding. But this is more and more breaking up in Lebanon due to this civil society movement, and people are more and more realizing that the worst sectarian demagogues have business interests, crude business interests. I know some Darfur rebel leaders, and they all have their businesses. It's ridiculous. They are ousted former political members from the central government in Sudan, so they want to get back or look for other ways. So it's people are getting behind this veil of legitimacy and doing something about it. And even if it is possible in Lebanon, I mean, for sure it can be possible everywhere else.
Thank you. So 1, 2, 3, yeah, okay, but brief, very brief, please. 1.
Okay. My name is Jeff Manners. I'm a retired insurance executive, and I've been married to what was once a Yugoslav wife. Now she claims to be Slovenian. I have a long history with Yugoslavia, both romantically. I've been married 49 years, and I studied in Zagreb in 1972. Quickly, the question. I have many questions, but I'll try to pick the one that means the most. Talking about peace, I know one of the motives for the Serbian and Croatian nationalists is they all claim they want to live in one state. Was if Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina could become part of the EU, would that satisfy that craving, part one? Part two, I often hear that the Dayton Accords need to be changed in order that Bosnia meets the criteria to join the EU, but that's often blocked by the Srpska Republika. So, and maybe if there's a similar problem in Kosovo, could Monika and Adnan comment on that?
Thank you. Luca?
I think there is no need for me to introduce myself because I believe that everybody knows me. I'm Luca in terms of the Western Balkan group, but nevertheless, I'm sorry. Quick remark, I have to say it, I'm sorry. If we're talking about peace, if we're talking about reconciliation, if we're talking about lessons learned, there has to be somebody from Serbia sitting at this podium. I'm not saying it because I have to defend something. No, absolutely not. It's just simply because without dialogue, nothing will be ever possible. So this is the first comment that I have. The second comment that I have is... Question. Good. The question is the following. If we consider Dayton as a failed instrument in terms of establishing a country, or the Ahtisaari plan, at least it gave peace. My point of view is, or not my point, but my question to the Ukrainian colleague is, do you see any possibility that something similar could happen in the next 1 year? And also maybe a question to all of you. Back in the 90s, to pressure Milosevic, or the Croatian president or the Bosnian president, it was easy. Now you have to pressure a nuclear power. So how are you going to do this? This is something that I would like to hear, the difference between the conflict back then and the conflict now.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Uroš. I have finished political sciences here at Vienna University. And just quite a remark to what was already mentioned, I think that really Serbian side should also be here at the table, and that in this way, when we hear things that the Dayton agreement should be changed or it should be somehow disregarded in a way that there should be a unitary Bosnia, that shouldn't be done so, because there was an agreement. Well, not all. I heard it from a comment before, and that was already attacking, not attacking, but already all of remarks in past year that that there is attack. That we can also see that there is an attacking of one side in Bosnia, and we know that the agreement was made between three sides. That it was made between Milosevic, between Tudjman, and between Izetbegovic, and that made peace. And now we can see that change of that agreement after 30 years. What is the point of it? Will it bring then to war? Will it bring then to blood in the region? So maybe it is the best thing to keep it as it is already.
Okay.
And why? Basically, why to change it?
Then, gentleman here. Yeah.
My name's Colin Monroe. I was Deputy High Representative in Mostar after the war. Before that, Ambassador to Croatia. Now, the Dayton Agreement has one fundamental problem. It enshrines collective rights. Collective rights are not compatible with EU membership. How to solve that? Second question, the biggest curse that I observed in Bosnia was segregated education, which perpetuates division. I think there are still two schools under one roof. We've had that problem also in Northern Ireland. Can the panel suggest any way to stop it?
Thank you. The lady here, the lady with the green. Yeah.
I would also like to bring it back to the criteria of peace, because Dayton Accords, like we already said, it's externally imposed power sharing agreement. So essentially how I look at it, at least, it's this transition from unarmed violent conflict into conflict by other means, whether it is through economy or social institutions and so on and so forth. So if looking ahead, how can we make a criteria, because I don't agree that peace is only lack of armed violence, and what criteria, how would that criteria would look like, and is Dayton really accomplishing that?
Thank you. The gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm representing the Bosnian community in Austria, academic community here. And just two stories. Is a very pessimistic debate here. We have so many good examples of peace, like Rwanda, and even Germany and France before Second World War. Every 20 years was war. Now we have no war between those countries. But I didn't see here any example of how can we make a peace. Dayton is a disagreement, is not agreement. And if Dayton will not be changed, there will be no future in Bosnia. And without the future in Bosnia, there is no peace on Balkan.
Thank you. Yeah, the colleague, yeah.
Even Sam, I'm an author of a book about the road to war in Bosnia. I would like to ask the panelists, especially the legal expert from Graz, about the legitimacy of the current High Representative. With Christian Schmidt, it went from oversight to overreach, and I do not see him as a politician in the right spot there. And he's lacking diplomatic etiquette. And in comparison, Milorad Dodik is the most legitimate politician in Bosnia. He has won elections for 20 years. Then he was forced to step down, and now you have two Dodiks instead, because he will not go away. So please comment on the legitimacy of the High Representative.
So give the microphone behind, yes, to
yes,
the ambassador.
Gudrun Steinacker. I'm a former German diplomat, and I also studied in Belgrade in the 70s, was a diplomat in Yugoslavia in the 80s, before the war, so I know the situation before the war very well, and later on in different functions, also with the OSCE as an ambassador in successor states of Yugoslavia. But I would take up something Adnan said about business. I think we are faced with an enormous amount of corruption and organized crime in the whole region, which is also a result to these unsolved political issues, and the privatization, which was actually very much demanded by the international community, was a very flawed process. It took place partly, particularly in Bosnia, under the war, also in Croatia, the famous 100 families. I mention only what happened in Serbia and elsewhere is another question. So how far does this economic situation with very, very high corruption and privatized businesses in the hands of actually warlords contribute to the situation and the unsolved problems?
Thank you very much. I think there's were all the questions, a lot of them. Well, I would say that corruption is anywhere an element. I would ask all of you to go into it, because also now we have this big corruption eruption, at least in the media, and this is, of course, according to my opinion, also used against Ukraine. So how it would be good if you also may comment on that. But let's start here, and Adi, most of the questions were to you, so we can. Do you want to say anything?
Well, I mean, in general, the EU enlargement process could have been, and it was designed to actually address these issues regionally and collectively in the Western Balkans by offering the EU integration process. As I said before, had Yugoslavia been integrated in the community, maybe the war wouldn't have happened. So the EU enlargement was a driver, first by trying to reform the countries, and in the case of reconciliation and peace building, chapter 22 and 23 were the chapters to address these issues, and then by building societal cohesion and helping civil society on the ground to actually create a common future. But those both lagged, because again, the Central Eastern European model did not work in the Western Balkans, and that's another debate which I don't want to go around. But if the solution would have been collective in the region, it would have been EU enlargement.
Max?
Only regarding the question regarding the legitimacy of the High Representative. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm a political scientist. The legality is clear, I think, so he's the High Representative, but the legitimacy is, of course, another matter, a matter of that has to be treated from the perspective of new colonial international interventionism, and from there, I think this is a very much different debate, so I don't want to open this pandem.
Okay. Olesya?
All right, so I'll quickly speak about corruption and answer your question as well. Corruption is a pet subject for those of us who come from Eastern and Southern Europe, and not so much those who come from Northern and Western Europe. Nobody ever asked me about corruption in London, in the UK, although we could talk about it. But let me focus on Ukraine. So 2 things you need to know about the current corruption scandal. One is that it was uncovered by anti-corruption bodies that are part of the state. In other words, that is evidence that checks and balances work. And number 2, there was a response, and there was a huge media outcry and popular outcry in the country against the corruption scandal. I don't think it's over. I think we're going to see more of results of this outcry. So it's in the interest of the Ukrainian society that has been putting these safeguards in place against corruption to keep fighting corruption. And I think that is something that is very often missed. Are there civil society organizations in my adopted homeland, in the UK, that fight corruption just as vigorously as they do in Ukraine? I don't think so. I've never heard of them. Is there a need? Maybe. All right. So to answer your question, is it possible that something might happen in the next year? Of course it's possible if we make it possible. This war is an existential war for Ukraine. It's a war of defense. If we stop fighting this war, we'll be defeated. There will be no Ukraine. This war is also an existential war for Russia, for the Russian regime, because it's an imperialist war. As soon as it becomes less convenient for that regime to fight the war than not to fight the war, they will be open to negotiations and ceasefire and potential peace agreement. For the moment, we haven't made it. We, the international community, haven't made it with sanctions and all the other available tools that we have. We haven't made it inconvenient for them. It's still much more convenient for them to stay in power, to enrich themselves, to continue fighting this war than not. The imperialist project has to stop working for them. It hasn't. If we make it stop working for them, there's a possibility for something to change. Otherwise, this time next year, they will come up with the same 28, 38, 8 points that they've come before. Essentially 1 point, destroy Ukrainian statehood. Nothing will change. We can make it change.
Adi?
Yes, I will say something controversial. First of all, I didn't have dinner, so I'll be quick. Second, Dayton was a success, in my opinion. Not just because it gave peace to Bosnia and Herzegovina, but because it gave a situation which is not just a mere absence of war. I think we hear that very often, and we say that the trenches moved to political positions and political institutions, but that's not true. If it was just a mere absence of war, we would still have 3 mono-ethnic territories, we would still have checkpoints between them, and we would not have any level of reintegration, any level of accountability for the war crimes, any level of sense of justice for those who suffered in the war. This is why this is not just a mere absence of the war, and this is more than just the peace. So in that sense, Dayton was a success. On other questions, I invite you really, everyone who's deeply interested in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to go back to October 2021 and a document that the ruling SNSD party adopted in the wartime headquarters of Republika Srpska in Pale, which had 7 points. It was a plan to withdraw from the state-level institutions completely, and as a last 7th point, it included use of violence in case of international community and others in Bosnia and Herzegovina disobey with the implementation of the plan. And then look what has happened since October 2021. Look at the number of Serbs who have opposed that plan. Look at the dynamic inside the ruling coalition, inside the opposition in Republika Srpska. Look at the narratives in Republika Srpska, those opposing unilateral illegal activities and those opposing using force to rearrange the post-Dayton Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think this is the key dividing line in the political landscape of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and if I talk precisely about the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, within the Serb community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's not about whether they feel Serb or not, whether they feel Orthodox or not. It's not about us convincing them that they are more Bosnians than Serbs. They all feel very strongly about being Serbs. I think the key dividing line in the Serb political, among the Serbs at the political level is whether we believe that going unilaterally, using violence to change what we have at the moment in Bosnia and Herzegovina is a way to go or not. And I think the early elections, presidential elections, show clearly that this division is also seen among the citizens. Because yes, Milorad Dodik's an SNSD candidate won, but he actually did not win because the process is still ongoing, and we still have to see if there will be repetition of elections. There was alleged of fraud, etc. So the process is still ongoing. But the difference between the two candidates, even at the moment, in a snap, is just 9,000 votes, which means that there are 200,000 Serbs who do not necessarily agree with this October plan, who did not agree with challenging the Dayton structure in a unilateral, illegal way. And I think this is a huge success of the Dayton Peace Accord and a huge success of Bosnia and Herzegovina today, because there is the opposition. And we can now say what is older, egg or a chicken. There is unilateral activities on the other side as well. I mean, use of the bond powers in past 5 years has been really unilateral. It has been an attempt to affect political dynamic of the country unilaterally by using such a strong powers to see what will it create. And it created what it created. And I think that was wrong. And when I was asked whether this should be the path that the OHR should be using, I was telling to policymakers, no. Because I don't think that will bring Bosnia and Herzegovina in a better position 5 years later, and it didn't, in my opinion. And same goes for the Bosniak politicians. They did not use violence, they did not threaten to use violence, but they used their foreign policy positions to present their own vision of Bosnia and Herzegovina and their own positions in Bosnia. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that was unimaginable, because politicians in Sarajevo knew if we start to present our own position, then we will legitimize others doing that. Fact that the Bosnian Croat foreign policy is completely exported to Zagreb and to Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Croatia is bad thing for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it is partly result because of Croats do not feel that they can appoint ambassadors, at least their share of ambassadors, because the member of the presidency who sets that is not someone who they feel represents them. So we can talk who's older, egg or a chicken. But for me, the question, and this is why I want to disagree, I'm here not as a Bosniak side, I'm here as a policy analyst, Adnan ČERIMAGIĆ, working for a think tank that is not based in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in Berlin, is the question, what can we from the outside and what the Bosnian and Herzegovinians can do to learn from the past? And I would say it's incredible that so many Serbs and so many Serb politicians have learned and are openly saying we don't want to use violence to change the Dayton Peace Agreement. And I think this is a huge achievement. In that sense, to conclude, because I'm very, very hungry, I think that European Union membership would be good for Bosnia and Herzegovina and for the region, because it would fulfill the dreams of the nationalists, of reunifications, etc. I simply think it's very bad for Bosnian and Herzegovinian economy, it's very bad for its institutions, it's very bad for its rule of law, and country will need to change. We can't have 4 parallel judicial systems, which we do have at the moment, but we can still have 3 members of the presidency, and we can have Republika Srpska and the cantons and still be members of the EU, and we can have some collective rights being protected. I tell you that also as someone who studied law at the University of Graz and who knows European Court of Human Rights.
Okay.
And I conclude. I will really conclude with one last sentence. But for that to happen, also EU needs to have an offer, not just for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but for the rest of the region, and that needs to be a credible offer. That means people need to believe that they can be part of the EU. And on that hill I will die. Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs, and others are not irrational nationalist lunatics who cannot see what's good for them and what's bad for them, but many of them do fear, not just each other, but fear also of Europe and fear also of Russia, fear also of different actors. And when you have fear, as you can see in Austria, but also in Germany and in other countries, then citizens move to some political solutions which do not offer solutions, but do offer the reconciliation for their fears, or a bit of easement of their fears, which in the end will be catastrophic. But that's what we sometimes do. We humans self-destruct.
Thank you. Thank you. It was already a concluding word, but as we did not discuss enlargement, one yes-no question. Kosovo, in 10 years' time, will Kosovo be a member of the European Union, yes or no?
I hope so.
Ali, Bosnia-Herzegovina.
I think it can be a member of the EU.
Olesya, concerning two countries, Ukraine and United Kingdom?
I'd like to say, I hope yes for both.
For both. Okay, with this hope, we conclude the discussion. Thank you very much, and you have some food outside. Thank you.